Right now, I've got full reviews up on the channel for the iPhone 15 Pro Max and the Galaxy S24 Ultra, two of the very best smartphones on the market right now. But which one is better? It only makes sense to throw Google's Pixel 8 Pro into the mix as well, in particular for when we get to crowning the camera champion, and especially because the 7 Pro was the winner last year. But this in-depth comparison is going to cover every aspect from the build to the displays to the battery life and more. All three phones have had plenty of time to improve and fix bugs with software updates, so no more excuses. I've also personally spent a lot of time with each of them to get a clear idea about how they compare with real-world use. So let's get into it and find out which of these three leading flagships is the best. Starting with the design then, I'm so pleased to finally be able to say that all three phones have flat displays. This is much more functional, durable and convenient than any curved display, so I think it's great, though I do appreciate that some will miss the curve. Apple and Samsung are both ahead with durability, not only feeling more premium in the hand, but using higher quality materials too, like stronger glass and titanium for the frame as opposed to the Pixel's aluminium. The iPhone has a slight lead here, using a higher grade of titanium, a greater depth rating for the water resistance, and supposedly uses the strongest glass. That last claim is questionable, and I'm sure you'll find drop tests online showing varying results, but the iPhone still takes the build and durability crown overall. In terms of ergonomics, there's no obvious size difference at all. These are all very big phones, and there's no clear winner for reachability across the screen. I do have a preference for the iPhone's button layout though, since the power and volume keys are on opposite sides, and also because of the customizable action button. I don't use it often, and yes, you can mimic these features through software, but an easy access physical button is only an added bonus. The Pixel and Ultra have the volume and power buttons the opposite way around, but the only reason I prefer the Pixel layout is simply because they're lower down and easier to reach. This, along with its lighter weight and the rounded corners and frame, mean that the Pixel overall is the most comfortable to hold and use. The Ultra loses out here for having sharper corners that dig into your hand more. I must say though that the satin finish on the titanium frames is more visually appealing and premium to the touch, and I prefer it over the glossy, sometimes oily feeling Pixel frame. All three have a lovely satin back glass though, which looks and feels great. There are one-handed accommodations for each of these phones to improve their ease of use. The iPhone and Pixel both offer a swipe to pull your content down to the lower half of the screen and a one-handed keyboard mode. You get better options like resizing on the Pixel though. Samsung on the other hand offers a fully resizable and movable window of your entire display content, not to mention the addition of the S Pen, which offers a whole new experience altogether. The S Pen is not for everyone, but it's something that's unique to Samsung and to which the iPhone and Pixel offer no competition. I find the Pixel offers the best typing experience, with a great keyboard first of all, but also strong, satisfying haptics. The iPhone and Ultra haptics are much more subtle. You've got restrictions like the lack of a number row on iOS and the horrendous autocorrect on Samsung's keyboard, which is still an issue even today. So those are the practical aspects of the design, but you may find these eclipsed by the aesthetic element. Choosing the phone you think has the best design is a perfectly good reason, and it's entirely subjective. I happen to prefer a rounder phone shape as opposed to the boxy Ultra. It's why I prefer the base S24 models, though I also like Samsung's clean camera layout the best here. The camera bump is considerably chunkier on the other two phones as well. There's the visual appeal of the displays to consider too. Apple finally slimmed down the bezels with the 15 Pros to catch up with the competition, but Dynamic Island is still more of an eyesore compared to the Android hole punches. The Pixel just missed out on having symmetrical bezels like the other two, and the Ultra has the best screen-to-body ratio, so I think Samsung wins for the appearance. Of course, the reason the iPhone has that larger cutout is to house the components needed for Face ID. This remains my favourite unlock method on a phone. I find it the most convenient and reliable, and it obviously offers the security that the Pixel and Ultra's Face Unlock method can't provide. The technology is superior, and the aesthetic trade-off is worth the convenience in the end because you do eventually forget the big cutout is there. The Ultra comes in second with an equally reliable ultrasonic fingerprint scanner. It's more consistent than Google's optical scanner in the Pixel, so you may want to consider which biometric method you prefer too. Let's take a closer look at those displays then. So we've got 6.7 inches for the iPhone and Pixel, and then 6.8 for the Ultra. All three are LTPO panels, so they dynamically refresh the display up to 120Hz and offer a roughly 1440p resolution. The Pixel and iPhone each fall slightly shy of this. There's no real winner in terms of the smoothness of the display because the iPhone lags behind when swiping across home screens, but it also has the best inertial scrolling and some of the smoothest animations too. The Pixel has super smooth swiping and good scrolling, but its animations are slower than Samsung's. So the Ultra feels the most snappy and responsive, albeit not quite as smooth. It's really all to do with software rather than the actual displays. They all get super bright, but the specs will tell you the Pixel leads the iPhone and the Ultra leads them both. There is a very important distinction between the specs and real-world use though. The specs only tell you the potential for the brightness, and not necessarily what you'll actually experience. Manually maxing out the brightness, you'll see the Pixel take the lead. But then with HDR video, it drops behind the Ultra quite noticeably. You'll only see the true peak brightness in very bright conditions using auto brightness. And here, the Ultra is the clear winner. That anti-reflective coating gives you much clearer and bolder colours too, so it's easily the most readable in sunlight. Notice the iPhone is actually brighter than the Pixel here though. This is what I mean about the real-world use not always matching the specs. I noticed the iPhone giving a much brighter viewfinder when using the camera as well. That made framing shots a lot easier, and again, you wouldn't have guessed that from the specs alone. The Ultra not only gets the brightest, but it easily reaches the dimmest levels as well. It's the most versatile, and I really like that both Apple and Samsung offer adaptive white balance for more relaxing viewing. Colour is a consideration as well, with both Android phones offering more punchy, vibrant colour profiles. Apple has always gone for a more natural look, and the difference is immediately obvious. I definitely like the punchiness of the Ultra, and it's the most vibrant display here. But colour accuracy is a factor too, and it was really obvious to me how whites have a pinker tinge on the Pixel, they're slightly green on the Ultra, and the most accurate on the iPhone. An important note on Samsung's anti-glare coating, it does quite clearly considerably reduce reflections. And as I said in the full review, this would have been an absolute game changer and I almost loved it, if it weren't for the fact that I think most people are going to be using screen protectors. Unless you use Samsung's own expensive anti-glare film protector, then you're going to get exactly the same reflections as any other phone. But let me know in the comments, would you always use a screen protector, or would the Ultra actually give you a significant advantage over the others? Overall, I still think the Ultra wins for best display here. It has the highest screen-to-body ratio, its boxy shape lends itself to cinematic content, and the brightness and vivid colours are very appealing. With the speaker quality, it is very close between the iPhone and the Ultra. There's definitely not enough in it for it to be a deal breaker. The iPhone just has a slight edge on volume and a fuller bass response, so I think it does win overall. The Pixel trails slightly behind the other two and can't quite match the same clarity or volume, but take a listen and see which you think sounds best. I'll only briefly cover software since updates constantly bring new features and the comparison boils down to the same fundamental difference every time. iOS versus Android is clearly the biggest argument first and foremost, with iOS being, from my experience, the most simple and reliable software to use. But of course it is limited by the walls of Apple's ecosystem. Apps still tend to be optimized best on iOS because developers prioritize it. But Apple also restricts your creative freedom a lot more than Android, despite efforts in recent years to relax those constraints. I think the big thing for me isn't so much the customization, it's the ability to multitask. That's something pro users prioritize, and the limited features with Dynamic Island still pale in comparison to what any Android phone is offering right now. The fundamental difference between the two Android softwares is that Samsung's One UI, famously, is the most feature-packed Android skin on the market. The Ultra is the multitasking and productivity king, with features like edge panels, pop-up windows, and the powerful Samsung DeX. The S Pen can actually really help with the productivity side of things as well. There are some One UI tweaks I enjoy too, like the custom full-screen notification alerts. There are features and apps for everything, including duplicate apps for many of Google's native Android foundations. And some features are buried behind endless menus as well, and this is where Samsung's weakness creeps in. One UI has gained a reputation for being bloated and cluttered, and it's really hard to argue with that. It's precisely why many people prefer the Pixel's cleaner and simpler UI. It's almost like the iOS of Android, with all of the key features and customization options most people need, without the excess rubbish. There's a lot to be said for the aesthetic element, especially when most of the software features are shared across all Android phones. Pixels will be the first devices to get the latest Android features and security updates. They have the best Android cool features like screening and Hold for Me. But recently we've seen an overlap, especially with the introduction of Galaxy AI, where Samsung devices are not just getting a lot of those features early too, but are expanding on them. AI is currently the key aspect in which the two Android phones are far ahead of the iPhone. The Ultra in particular has a big lead. It looks like we'll have to wait until the iPhone 16s are launched to see what Apple will do with AI. A word on software support too. This always used to be a massive win for Apple, but these days it's the Android phones that claim the greatest longevity of support. 7 years of software and security updates. Now, Samsung and Google both need to prove they'll actually stick to these claims and don't have a proven track record like Apple. But taking this on face value, the phones are now, for the first time, pretty much evenly matched in terms of support. Moving on to the performance, Apple and Google are using their own custom chips in the A17 Pro and the Tensor G3 respectively, while Samsung opted for the popular Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. There's 8 gigs of RAM for the iPhone, whilst the Androids get 12, and this is how it translates into the performance benchmarks. As expected, Apple takes the lead with the CPU scores. It is still technically the fastest device, and that does come in handy with a lot of day-to-day tasks. Remember the editing speed comparison last year where the iPhone dominated? That's a good example, and it is still the case with the latest models. But note how far behind the Pixel is, especially on the multi-core score. That's really our first suggestion that the 8 Pro isn't quite on the same performance tier. Switching over to 3D Mark to compare graphics and ultimately gaming performance, and we now see Samsung's Ultra take a commanding lead. An extra 7 frames per second in Wildlife Extreme and more than double the score of the Pixel. The Tensor chip isn't really designed for intensive gaming. It was interesting seeing that the Pixel wasn't able to run the Solar Bay ray tracing test, whilst the iPhone and Galaxy both could. Again, with the stress testing, we see a similar distribution, but notice the slightly better consistency with the iPhone and then a far more stable result with the Pixel 8 Pro. It may not be able to sustain as high levels, but you're not going to see the performance drop off as much over time as you will with the Ultra. Google says it prioritized efficiency over raw performance, although I saw a pretty much identical battery drop for all 3 phones during this test. You definitely can game on the Pixel 8 Pro as well. It's not exactly a weak performer, there's just a substantial step up with the other two, and for the second year running, Samsung's Ultra dominates and offers the best multitasking and certainly high-end gaming performance. I would also add that the iPhone and Galaxy are both ahead when it comes to storage, both starting at 256GB. The Pixel storage varies by region, even by phone colour, and it's likely you'll either not have access to the 1TB model, like those of us here in the UK, or you'll have to pay extra to avoid the baseline 128 model. Getting into the battery comparison, it honestly depends on how you use the phone. A typical end-of-day example with some moderate use throughout the day, social media browsing, a few hours of YouTube, you can see the Ultra with a small lead and the Pixel trailing behind. And this pretty much sums up my experience with the phones. What's interesting though is the more hours you spend watching YouTube, for example, the greater the lead the Ultra takes for battery life. But if you're a much lighter user and your phone will spend a lot of time in standby, well, that's actually where the Pixel does best. Here's another example with more intensive use, including an almost full day and night using the cameras, and you can see how even the results can be. I was honestly surprised to see the Pixel keeping up, because battery life has typically been a weakness for Pixels, but it's much improved with the 8 Pro. So I think, unlike in previous years, you can't really go wrong with any of these phones. They're all pretty much 2-day phones with excellent battery life. But overall, there is a battery life winner, and that's the Galaxy S24 Ultra. It's also the winner for the charging speed, even if you don't use Samsung's super fast charging protocol. You can get a full charge in just over an hour, whilst the other two take around an hour and a half. The iPhone is still the slowest and doesn't offer reverse wireless charging like the two Android phones. But it does have the super convenient MagSafe, which is not just handy for charging, but for other accessories too. Today's fast charger recommendation is from channel partner Ugreen, and it's their new Nexode RG. As you'll see, it's designed to look like a little robot, and there's actually a functional LED display that changes to indicate the charging status, so you'll be able to see instantly when your devices are fully charged, for example. It's still packing all of Ugreen's smart technology for thermal safeguarding, all of the usual charging protocols, including Samsung's super fast charging 2.0, but it can charge all 3 of these phones at full speed. This is a 65-watt 3-port charger as well, so you can charge multiple devices at once. The RG is just as powerful and reliable as their usual GaNTech chargers, it just offers a refreshingly unique design. So if you're interested in this, I'll leave the links to it in the video description. Let's take a look at the camera comparison now. I'll show you the specs on screen for those interested, but we all know it's about how real-life photos and videos actually compare. The Pixel took home the crown last year, but so much of a phone's camera is subjective, so do comment which you think is the winner in each of these scenarios. The main consistent difference in photos was the Ultra offering by far the most saturated and vibrant images. The iPhone typically offered the best detail and dynamic range, but also had some issues with white balance. And then the Pixel would have the dimmest and softest photos with more muted but realistic colours. It often looked the most natural. The Ultra struggled the most with HDR, often showing overexposed highlights, but it's actually the Pixel doing the best here. The iPhone's brighter exposure reveals more detail, but that Pixel shot is the closest to what I saw in real life, and that's what tended to be the case as well. This is only the general trend though. Here you can see very clearly the Ultra's overly vibrant colour of course, but it also has the best HDR here, retaining some of the blue in the sky. The Pixel is struggling with the white balance for a change, and zooming in, you can see that it's the softest image again. The iPhone wins for sharpness and detail, but of course you might just have a personal preference over the image style. Perhaps Samsung's bold and striking look, or maybe the more natural and realistic Pixel look. I also wanted to mention the phone struggles with grass. The Ultra just cranks up the saturation slider, the iPhone's is too bright, and then the Pixel gives this kind of sepia tone. I've seen this golden colouring applied to trees and grass in other examples too. It's obviously just a thing the Pixel phones do, and it is quite visually appealing. Now, a realistic colouring lies somewhere between the Pixel and iPhone, but I would say the Pixel is still capturing the most true-to-life scene once again. I also captured portrait shots here, and notice first of all how much the Pixel crops in compared to the other two, but in terms of the actual portrait effect, it also keeps the least of your subject in focus. Zooming in though, you can see that the Ultra has really struggled with keeping Lily's face in focus, so that's the poorest attempt. The iPhone and Pixel are both pretty close, but I think Google is overdoing the sharpness, so the fur in Lily's face looks quite over-processed compared to the iPhone. With human subjects though, it was a different story. Now the Ultra's cutouts were pretty much flawless, and the Pixel struggled quite a lot. Ignoring how unflattering these photos are with my eyes closed in some of them, they still show how jagged and uneven the Pixel's cutout is, despite the fact that it has the most accurate colours. The Ultra and iPhone also both offer a really nice 5x portrait on their telelenses, which looks fantastic for portraits. Trying to create a matching image with the Pixel, you'd have to move physically closer, you don't get that lovely bokeh, and the general quality is really quite poor. Now, I do like the iPhone's colour consistency between lenses and the performance with both human and non-human subjects, but Samsung takes the win for me here. The Ultra does a fantastic job of detecting the entire subject, down to the finest hairs, whereas the iPhone tapers the cutout at the edges, like over my shoulders. The Ultra's image is also sharper, and the warmer skin tone is more flattering. With these ultra-wides, I'm immediately drawn to the higher contrast and saturation with the Ultra, so I prefer the other two here, and they are closer to real life. You get a more saturated blue sky with the Ultra though, so there are perks to this processing style. All three did pretty great with the dynamic range, but I'm giving the iPhone the win here for the level of detail. We can see that the Ultra is much softer at the edges in particular, and the iPhone brings out the best texture in the walls. There's even some noise in the Ultra's shadows because of Samsung's sharpening. Another example here shows the iPhone with the best HDR. The other two are both struggling in the center of these images. But the iPhone white balance is really bad, and there's a very green hue which is quite typical of Apple. The Ultra and Pixel are both quite close, but the Pixel was the most accurate and generally did produce the best white balance. This example again shows the iPhone's overly blue, cool colours. It's a shame because again the Pro Max has no blown out highlights, there's excellent detail in the sky and ground, but the Android phones are much more true to life. The Pixel takes the win for having the best colour and dynamic range. The highlights are still controlled, but it keeps really good shadow detail, which the iPhone in particular is struggling with. Switching to the main lens, we see these differences carried over. You can see Samsung's more vibrant saturation here. This red umbrella really stands out, for example, against the more muted iPhone and Pixel colours. Once again, the iPhone has taken a great photo on its own, but side by side with the others, you then realise there's that white balance issue when you have some context. Moving up to 3x zoom, it appears at first glance that the iPhone has the best detail, but cropping in, you can see that's not actually the case. I think the Pixel is the winner here. Just look how clean and sharp that sign is. The iPhone shot is soft, and the Ultra's is sharp but noisy. The Ultra is even switched over to its 3x telelens. The other two phones are cropping in on the main lens. But the Pixel has such good digital zoom, the best of any smartphone in my opinion, and it allows the phone to match or even beat the optical zoom performance of its competitors. These are the 5x zoom shots, so now all three phones have switched to their 5x lenses, hence the quality improvement, in particular from the Ultra, contrary to what you might expect. The vibrancy of the Ultra's colours stands out once again. You may like this or prefer the other two more natural looking photos. And cropping in closer, we can now see that the iPhone introduces some noise as well. This is something I pointed out back in October for the full review. It's why I actually prefer the Pro camera to the Pro Max, and it's still affecting the phone today. Again though, it's the Pixel with the cleanest looking image, so I think it has a lead. Looking at the 10x zoom shots, I noticed the iPhone brightens up images at this zoom level, so now the Pixel shot seems a lot dimmer in comparison, but it's actually the most realistic photo of these three. That's more like what I was seeing with my own eyes, but maybe you just like Samsung's bright and vivid colours instead. Zooming in, I'd now say the Ultra is handling the sharpness the best, and the Pixel image is a bit soft, so the results really do vary by the zoom level. The iPhone sometimes keeps up perfectly well at 10x zoom. It looks great here for example. But then switching up to the 20x shot, it's close to its maximum zoom and struggles a lot more. The Ultra comes through here with a commanding lead, and the Pixel image is surprisingly soft. So this illustrates Samsung's advantage in that 10 to 20x zoom range. Another 5x here shows the iPhone lacking contrast, the Ultra with too much, and then the Pixel sitting in that sweet spot in between. At 10x again things seem pretty even, though the iPhone's green hue is creeping in and the Ultra has cranked up the saturation once more. But then at 25x zoom we're maxed out on the iPhone and it is quite clearly struggling. The Ultra can obviously zoom far beyond this, but already has that oil painting-like effect spoiling the photo. It can reach 100x zoom on paper, but you often get results like this. The Pixel shot is clearly softer than the Ultra's, but it's also much more realistic. It has better colours and is a great example of why I'd say it's the Pixel, not the Ultra, that gives the best overall zoom performance. Looking at macro mode, the iPhone offers great colour, detail and exposure. It's just let down by a shallow focus plane and that slightly grainy looking bokeh. The Pixel shot is a bit softer but has a much more pleasing blurred background and therefore takes the edge. And as for the Ultra, it creates these Instagrammable and stylistic shots, but for me it's way over the top. I'd prefer to edit my natural looking photos myself if I wanted this look. It's just built into Samsung phones to recognise certain subjects and saturate colours, plants especially. You can't simply turn off the scene optimizer to stop this from happening, so the Ultra takes my least favourite macro photos. With night mode, the results were really interesting. So initially I saw some of the trends I expected, like the iPhone capturing a more naturally dark sky, and as we saw in last year's comparison, it still leads the way when it comes to the level of detail captured. You can see in these tele shots of the building all of those textures in the stonework captured in the middle here on the iPhone. It's impressive. But there were downsides too. Can you see here for instance how it's struggling to handle those bright highlights in this scene? Zooming in, we can see again that great level of detail, like in the brickwork. But notice how much better Samsung's Ultra is in controlling the highlights. So you can actually read the text in the underground sign and clearly see the interior of this office. The Pixel shot, like the iPhone's, is blown out and is quite a bit softer too. Despite having the fastest capture time during the day, the iPhone was generally the slowest at night, and that sometimes led to shots that were overexposed. And I noticed there's a consistent contrast issue at nighttime, which is interesting given that the iPhone has the least contrast during the day. These images may appear similar at first, but can you see how unusually high the contrast is in the centre with the iPhone? It's giving an unnatural look to the plants especially. The Pixel is giving the most natural colour and contrast here, that's the closest to what I could see with my eyes. But notice the menu in the background and how its exposure is being controlled far better with the Ultra. It's blown out on the Pixel and iPhone. As much as I like the iPhone's naturally dark shadows for the night sky, they are still a bit too dark for almost everything else. With the Ultra being a tad too high on the colour saturation, the Pixel is showing the most realistic image here. If the iPhone were to win in terms of detail, then the Pixel would win for the colour and the saturation. A lot of the time you'll find these three are very similar. There's no clear winner overall, but I must say that I'm drawn towards how well the Ultra handles dynamic range at nighttime and controls those highlights. So despite the iPhone's great detail level, I would say it's the weakest night performer overall. I think you could argue either way on the Ultra versus Pixel. I like aspects of both, but I think Samsung's dynamic range is a more technically impressive feat of this particular phone, the S24 Ultra. The Pixel's impressive colour science is more of a general Google processing feature as opposed to this particular Pixel 8 Pro, so Samsung's Ultra is my nighttime winner overall. With night video, I was really surprised to see just how close these three are in performance, but I'd actually put the Ultra in last here for two reasons. One is the constant fluctuation in the exposure, so you don't get consistent lighting like in the other two, and also the oversaturation of colours again just isn't true to life. Also showing this freeze frame here, you'll see that it can't handle the highlights as well as it can for photos. The iPhone actually does best here. Between the Pixel and iPhone, it was much closer, but the iPhone footage is smoother, and that's always been a strength for Apple's video. I did test Google's video boost feature as well, and yes, it does slightly improve things, but it's definitely not worth the hours-long processing time sending the data back and forth from the cloud to get these results. The Ultra did much better in the daytime. I was actually very impressed with the sharpness in the first half of this clip especially. The Pixel video is good, but it does have some contrast issues, and once again, the iPhone has the smoothest video of these three. Switching environments though, you can see that the iPhone still has a white balance issue and overly cool colours. The Pixel is the most accurate to what I was seeing in real life. If I show you another freeze frame, hopefully you can see how natural the Pixel colours are. So overall, there are things to like about all three phones, and it was really pleasing to see how much the Android phones have caught up with the iPhone's video. Switching to the selfie video, the Pixel's is definitely the worst. It's the poorest quality in sharpness, detail, and also has this weirdly dark contrast we've also seen with previous Pixels. Just look how dark my t-shirt, hair and eyes look on the right. The iPhone video is characteristically sharp and bright, a little overexposed, but it does keep the subject well lit. And then the Ultra video once again has way over the top saturation. I mean, just look at the grass in the background. The iPhone also handled HDR the best by far. It was especially poor on the Pixel. So it's between the iPhone and Ultra really, and depends on whether or not you like the iPhone's bright selfie exposure, or prefer the darker but richer Samsung video. Okay, so this is a sample of the mic quality for all three phones. It is pretty windy out here today, and I think that's where the Pixel struggled the most. So I'm putting the Pixel in third. The iPhone I think was a step up from this, and I'd put that in second. And then the Ultra I think had the best isolation and captured your voice the best. So that's the one that I'm putting in first, but let me know in the comments which one do you think sounded the best. And finally, comparing the selfie photo quality, once again the Pixel shot is spoiled by the overly harsh contrast. That selfie lens just isn't as high quality as the other two. It's quite close between the others, but the Ultra's sharpness is excellent. The colour is a little bit pink, and I've mentioned the saturation issue, but I think the overall quality does still edge out the iPhone. In this other example here, if you can forgive my lifeless stare, you can see that the iPhone colours are washed out and too cool, whereas they're much richer and lifelike with the Ultra. So the selfie award goes to Samsung. So you really could argue the case for any of these three phones, and it will depend on your usage and your personal preference for the image style. For me, Samsung takes the nighttime and selfie crown. It also offers the best pro photo controls. The iPhone offers the best detail capture and video capability, especially with log and ProRes recording. But my winner this year is the Pixel 8 Pro. It has the best dynamic range in photos, colour accuracy, and it would more often capture the most true-to-life images, and ultimately, that's how you'd objectively appraise a camera. So which of these three is the best overall? Well, that depends on what you want from your smartphone, but one consideration is of course the price. The Pixel is the cheapest, starting at $999. There's then a $200 jump up to get the 15 Pro Max, or a $300 jump to the S24 Ultra. Of course, we're now 6 months on from the Ultra being launched, even longer for the iPhone and Pixel, and you are much more likely to find big discounts on the Android phones than you are for the iPhone. That's something to bear in mind too. Still, the Ultra is incredibly expensive, but it's arguably the most capable all-round device. If you're looking for the ultimate powerhouse, a phone built around multitasking and productivity, hey, maybe you really want the S Pen, there's probably no better phone for you. The Ultra has an incredible display with crazy gaming capabilities. There are easily ways to justify it. Perhaps instead you want a class-leading build quality, fantastic speakers, and the fastest phone on the market. You've got the 15 Pro Max. Maybe you have a foot in the door of Apple's ecosystem and need the unique software experience of iOS. There's certainly a lot to be said for the convenience of having an iPhone. But my personal pick this year, and certainly the winner in terms of value for money, is the Pixel 8 Pro. It doesn't quite offer the same performance as the other two, but I'm not a hardcore gamer and the phone is plenty powerful enough for my use. Google fixed the single biggest drawback of the 7 Pro by delivering a greatly improved battery life that can now match the other two in most situations. Over the past 6 months, it's been my favourite device to use. I love the Pixel software and having the best smartphone camera in my pocket. Let me know in the comments though, which one is your winner this year. If you found this helpful at all, then please give the video a like, subscribe to see more content like this, and make sure you've hit the bell icon so you actually get notified when new videos go live. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.